Everyone knows about the classic evil people in history, but what about the ones you were never taught? Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. I'm your host Emily, and today we're counting down our list of the top 10 evil people erased from history that you never learned about in school. Coming in at number 1 is Josef Mengele. Josef Mengele was a German officer and physician during World War II. Nicknamed the Angel of Death, he performed deadly experiments on prisoners, where he was a member of the team of doctors who selected victims to die in the gas chambers, and was one of the doctors who administered the gas. One of Joseph's most chilling characteristics was his double-sided facade. He would offer sweets to the young in the camp's kindergarten, then select them as subjects for lethal experimentation. His medical experiments showed no consideration for the victim's health, safety, or physical and emotional suffering. Now, he was particularly interested in identical twins, people with heterochroma iridium, eyes of two different colors, dwarfs, and people with physical abnormalities. He conducted forced sterilizations of prisoners, amputated limbs, and injected chemicals in eyeballs, and once sewed Romani twins back to back. After the war, he escaped justice and lived out the rest of his life in Argentina and Paraguay, and he was never held accountable for the atrocious acts he committed. Number 9. Ilya Ivanovich. Ilya Ivanovich was a Russian biologist who worked in artificial insemination. Ilya then wanted to get of animals and put it into different species to see what happened. He started off slowly creating a Zedonk from a zebra and a donkey, a rat mouse, a guinea pig mouse, and an antelope and cow. Then in 1910, he told a gathering of zoologists that he thought it could be possible to create a human-ape hybrid, often now referred to as a human Z. Now, his chance finally came after the Russian Revolution of 1917 while working at the Institute Pasteur. It was here in 1924 he was given the opportunity to work on this. In 1926, he and Serge Vonaroff transplanted a human ovary into a chimp before attempting to inseminate her with human sperm. He attempted this 2 more times without success, so he then pitched an alternative approach. Take chimpanzees and implant it into African women without their knowledge or consent. Now, the plan was to pretend the insemination of a chimpanzee was merely a medical examination, letting them find out months afterwards when they gave birth to an exceptionally hairy and suspiciously good at climbing baby. Yeah. Now, thankfully, the French governor said no to the idea, but Ilya traveled further with 20 apes and was able to convince people to go along with it. 5 women or more volunteered for his experiment. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, no ape survived long enough at the ape nursery, and though he had women, Ilya found himself out of space. Now, before he could ship in more, the Soviet Academy of Sciences heard about his plans to inseminate women in Africa without consent, and all support for the project was taken away. Number 8. Shiro Ishii. Shiro Ishii was a Japanese war criminal, microbiologist, and army medical officer. He was the director of Unit 731, a biological warfare unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. He led the development and application of biological weapons during the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 to 1945, including the bubonic plague attacks of Chinese cities, and planned the Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night biological attack against the United States. Ishii and his colleagues also engaged in human experimentation, resulting in the deaths of over 10,000 subjects. Experiments led under his command included vivisection of living people, prisoners had limbs amputated and reattached to other parts of their body, some prisoners had parts of their bodies frozen and thawed to study the resulting untreated gangrene, and humans were also used as living test cases for grenades and flamethrowers, and they were injected with strains of diseases disguised as vaccinations to study their effects. Now, for some reason, Ishii was later granted immunity in the International Military Tribunal for the Far East by the United States government in exchange for information and research for the U.S. Biological Warfare Program. Now, Ishii's immunity deal was concluded in 1948, and he was never prosecuted for any war crimes or crimes against humanity, and his exact whereabouts or occupation were unknown. Number 7. Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong was a Chinese politician, communist philosopher, military strategist, strategist and revolutionary who was the founder of the People's Republic of China, PRC, which he led as the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party from the establishment of the PRC in 1949 until his death in 1976. Mao sought to protect China from foreign influence and grow China's agricultural and industrial power through a program called the Giant Leap Forward. Now, unfortunately, this initiative was a huge failure that caused widespread famine and economic collapse. Then, Mao's government tried to cover up the failure. Anyone who spoke out against the program was labeled as a right opportunist and would be arrested or have their life ended. In the end, over 45 million people died under his leadership. Now hey, there's nothing wrong with owning up to your mistakes, and I think that's something Mao should have done instead of trying to just gaslight everyone. Number 6. Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory was a Hungarian noblewoman and alleged serial slayer from the family who owned land in the Kingdom of Hungary, now Slovakia. Elizabeth and 4 of her servants were accused of tormenting and ending the lives of hundreds of girls and women between 1590 and 1610. Her servants were put on trial and convicted, whereas Elizabeth was imprisoned within the castle of Sajay. Michael Farron, a writer, said in 1999 that the accusations against Elizabeth were supported by testimony from more than 300 individuals, some of whom described physical evidence and the presence of mutilated, dead, dying, and imprisoned girls found at the time of her arrest. Now, stories about Elizabeth, though, then quickly became part of national folklore. Legends describing her vampiric tendencies, such as the tale that she bathed in the blood of virgins to retain her youth, were generally recorded years after her death. Number 5. Francisco Macias Nguema. Francisco Macias Nguema is viewed as one of the most brutal dictators in history. Under his rule, Equatorial Guinea was nicknamed Dachu of Africa. According to historians, Francisco may have been a psychopath as he suffered from mental illness and suffered psychological trauma as a child. Now, some of his evil reign is that on Christmas Eve 1969, Francisco had 186 suspected dissidents executed in the National Football Stadium in Malabo as amplifiers were playing Mary Hopkins' song "Those Were the Days." 150 of the dissidents were shot or hanged, and the others were forced to dig ditches in which they were buried up to their necks and eaten alive by red ants over the next few days. As time went on, Francisco became incredibly paranoid, which included mandating the death of those who wore glasses, banning the use of the word intellectual, and destroying boats to stop his people from fleeing from his rule, and fishing was banned. He was known to order entire villages to die just to eliminate one suspected dissident. His prisons, most importantly Black Beach, were notorious for human rights abuse, as prisoners were humiliated, starved, tormented, and had their lives ended without due process. Number 4. Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold II of Belgium was the second king of the Belgians from 1865 to 1909 and the founder and sole owner of the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908. Disguised his work and made it seem humanitarian, whereas he had sinister motives and was using forced labor to move Congolese resources. Leopold II took ownership of Congo and treated it like his personal property, as he referred to himself as the proprietor, and in an attempt to govern the people and their land, all sorts of inhuman and unthinkable methods were used. Now, sadly, Congo was looted and exploited for its natural resources, ivory, and rubber. Leopold II was a brutal slave master, and by the time he was done with Congo, the country had lost a lot of its people. Now, otherwise known as the Butcher of the Congo, Leopold II constantly enslaved and exploited the people, and the people were forced to work without pay, and he would amputate the hands of men, women, and the young when the quota of rubber was not met. By the end of his rule, about half of the population was dead. Number 3. Rafael Trujillo Molina. Rafael Trujillo Molina was a Dominican dictator who ruled the Dominican Republic from August 1930 until his assassination in May 1961. He served as president from 1930 to 1938 and again from 1942 to 1952, ruling for the rest of the time as an unelected military strongman under figurehead presidents. Now, his rule of 31 years is considered one of the bloodiest and most corrupt regimes in the Western Hemisphere and centered around a personality cult of the ruling family. Rafael's security forces were responsible for as many as 50,000 deaths. His domestic policy was built on terror, fear, and total compliance with his will. People called him El Jefe, the chief or the boss, and were utterly obedient towards him and his regime. Resistance was dealt with harshly, and any rebel usually ended up disappearing from the face of the earth. He also hated Haitians, and he ended the lives of every immigrant who was brave enough to to speak negatively about the regime in Dominican Republic outside of the country. Almost nobody was safe in their asylum, and no Dominican citizen could leave the country without Rafael's permission. He simply knew everything about everyone and was like a big brother figure. Number 2. Caligula, the third Roman emperor. Ruling the Roman Empire from 37 to 41 AD, Caligula was known to be sadistic, wild, and extravagant. In the first 3 months of his reign, he had 160,000 animals sacrificed. Later, he caught a brain fever and he was known to be mentally ill, believing he was a god. He felt prisoners should know a very painful death and began to end people's lives by causing them as much pain as possible. Many prisoners were fed to the caged wild panthers, lions, and bears, and if he disliked a gladiator, he would beat them over days until they died. Now, he was known to be so cruel that people would end their own lives rather than face him and his slow, lingering deaths. He also forced husbands to give him their wives, and he himself committed unethical practices with his sisters. And coming at number 1 is Idi Amin. Idi Amin was a Ugandan military officer and politician who served as the 3rd president of Uganda from 1971 to 1979. Now, he ruled as a military dictator and is considered one of the most brutal despots in modern world history. In addition to having his political rivals and government officials taken out, he also turned on ordinary civilians as farmers, students, and even religious figures. Amin would order public executions by firing squad for anyone he felt was plotting against his regime, and even had them televised. He'd have all of his victims' bodies tossed into the Nile, literally creating a bloodbath, and bodies were constantly seen floating down the Nile from Uganda, and at times a dam on Lake Victoria would be so clogged by bodies that it would cause power outages. Now, Amin was also rumored to have kept some of his victims' heads in his refrigerator and eat human body parts. His former health minister, Henry Kebi, said, "On several occasions he told me quite proudly that he had eaten the organs or flesh of his human victims. He was quoted as saying, 'It's not for me, I tried human flesh and it's too salty for my taste.'" Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 evil people erased from history that you never learned about in school. Did you know about any of these people? Let us know in the comments down below, and hey, don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there. I'm your host, Emily, and we'll see you next time. Peace.